Most people's first photo with their parents is taken when they're a newborn, at a hospital, after an exhausting labor and delivery. Mine was a little different. Mine was taken when I was 6 months old in an airport after a long flight over from South Korea with a caretaker. And despite my unconventional arrival, growing up, I was raised like most other white American children. I was an only child. My mom was a teacher. My dad worked for UPS. And I grew up in a supportive, stable home where I was loved unconditionally from the inside out. I ate peanut butter and honey sandwiches. I watched Sesame Street. We celebrated the 4th of July with a chicken barbecue at my grandmother's house every summer. And no one ever talked about the fact that I was Korean and the rest of my family was white. To them, and so many others, I was just Shene, their daughter. I was their granddaughter, their niece. And most of the time, even I forgot that I was Asian. It was only looking at a photo or seeing a reflection of myself and my parents in a mirror that I remembered, oh yeah, I don't look the same. But there were moments when I would feel the tug of my Asian side and when I felt invisible or stuck in this world in between. When I was about 12, during the 4th of July, my aunt started complaining about all of the Chinese immigrants who worked with my uncle. I don't understand, she said. If they're going to come to this country and take all the jobs, the least they can do is learn to speak English. I looked around the table. I looked at my mom, my dad, uncle and cousin, grandmother, and I waited for them to say something, but the table was silent. Finally, I said, "You know I'm Asian, right?" "Oh, but you don't count," was her response. And at the time, I interpreted what she said to be a compliment. I thought that it was her way of reminding me that it didn't matter that I was Korean or adopted. I was just part of the family. And I believed that we don't see color meant I was safe, that not counting as Asian meant we love you for you. And that's what I continued to believe for the next 20 years. But on the morning of March 16th, 2021, I woke up early to a headline that popped up on my phone screen. It said 8 people killed in Atlanta area massage parlor shootings. My white liberal Jewish husband was next to me. Our cat was curled up at my feet. And as I lay there reading the article, something stirred inside me. There was this storm of nervousness and anger and fear, because for months, I had been following the attacks on Asian elders. For months, I had a growing sense of fear around going out in public alone. But I rarely mention these fears because in my nearly all-white bubble, they were met with reassurance that I didn't really have anything to be worried about because I was a banana, yellow on the outside and white on the inside. It wasn't like I was one of those fresh off the boat Asians that people could hate. To most people, I was not really Asian enough to be targeted. But when I got to the end of that article, I stared at the ceiling and my mind raced back to my childhood. I remembered the first day of kindergarten when an older boy on the bus repeatedly asked me if my people ate dog. I remembered being in middle school, getting shoved into gym lockers by a classmate who called me a chink and told me to go back to where I came from, because supposedly all Asians look the same. I remembered my first day at a new high school when a boy in my science class loudly announced, "I have a girlfriend, but I'll dump her for you because Asian ass is hotter." And as I remembered those moments from my childhood, they meshed with the more serious ones of adulthood. Being fetishized, being verbally harassed, used to perpetuate the model minority myth, and constantly answering the question, where are you from? No, where are you really from? Not Asian enough to be targeted? Bullshit. The rest of that day was full of silence. There were no calls or messages from friends or family asking how I was doing. My husband merely said, "Don't let yourself get too upset about what's in the news today." And this wasn't because they don't love me and didn't care, but it was because it was not even remotely on their radar that I was Asian and I might have feelings about what had happened. So I sat on the couch alone and I let my mind spiral as I started picking apart the duality of my identity. I wondered if I was overreacting, if I shouldn't identify with the victims, 4 of whom are Korean women, because I wasn't really as Asian as they were. And I wondered, did I have the right or permission to feel afraid or angry? Was my sadness and grief for the victims and their families a form of imposter syndrome? And I felt guilty because as the day went on, I just grew more and more angry over people's deafening silence. And I blame myself for not speaking up, for not telling those who love me the most that seeing me and not seeing color really meant that by not seeing color, they didn't see me. And when a gunman shot and killed 10 people at my nearby King Soopers 6 days after the Atlanta shooting, I didn't need to hear about it from the news because my white bubble that had been so silent after Atlanta started blowing up my phone with messages asking if I was okay, if I was safe. And it wasn't lost on me that I was seen by my geographic location more than I was seen for being Asian. And since then, the past month has been one of the toughest of my life. Not because I know more about the shooter from Atlanta, but more about the victims from Boulder. Not because instances of anti-Asian hate have continued to rise. And not even because I was spat on and harassed in the parking lot when I went to get my COVID vaccine, but because I've refused to stay silent about being adopted, about being Asian, about being an American. And I'll continue to speak up because in 3 short weeks, my husband and I are due to give birth to our first child, a little girl. She will be biracial, Korean and Jewish American. And when I think about her life and her experiences growing up, I hope that unlike me, she's able to embrace her racial identity. I hope that the world allows her to, that people love her because of her race and not despite it. And more than anything, I hope that she is always seen and never feels invisible.